Pick it up. The words sliced the air. Not a request, an order. The billionaire smirked, watching her. Around them, the hushed whispers of Manhattan's elite. He thought he knew her kind, that a little cash would solve everything. He was wrong, dead wrong. She wouldn't cry. She wouldn't quit. She'd been broken before, rebuilt with steel and secrets. Kneeling, she began gathering the scattered bills, each touch deliberate, almost reverent. They didn't see it, not yet. The venom simmering beneath her quiet compliance. Compassion was her weapon, the knowledge of his hidden sins, her shield. Oh, they'd learn soon enough. They all would. About the storm brewing behind those eyes. A reckoning was coming, a beautifully quiet, devastating reckoning. A silence so profound, so heavy it stills the entire room. Because the waitress doesn't cry, she doesn't scream. She kneels. And with the grace of a fallen queen, she begins her response. A response that will not only shatter the billionaire's world, but expose a lie buried for years. Stay tuned to witness a takedown that proves revenge is a dish best served cold, right in the middle of a five-star restaurant. The gentle clinking of silverware against porcelain was the symphony of Chloe Hayes' life. Now it was a world away from the resonant chime of the grandfather clock in the foyer of her childhood home, a sound that had once marked the hours of a life filled with promise and privilege. At 24, Chloe moved with an economy of motion that bespoke a deep, bone-weary exhaustion disguised as professional efficiency. Here at Aria, one of New York City's most exclusive and ostentatious restaurants, efficiency was currency. Aria was a theater of wealth. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panorama of the glittering city skyline, a view that cost more per square foot than Chloe earned in a year. The air was thick with the scent of truffle oil, vintage Bordeaux, and the subtle, expensive perfumes of its clientele. Men in bespoke suits worth more than her student loan debt discussed mergers and acquisitions over plates of seared scallops, their voices a low, confident hum. Women adorned with diamonds that could blind a lesser mortal laughed with practiced delicacy, their lives a tapestry woven from threads Chloe could no longer even imagine touching. For 2 years, this had been her reality. By day, she was a law student at Columbia, buried in tours and case law fueled by cheap coffee and an unyielding, burning determination. By night, she donned the starched black uniform of Aria, her identity reduced to a polite smile and the name Chloe embroidered in silver thread over her heart. The irony was a bitter pill she swallowed with every shift. She, who had once dined at tables like these, was now serving them. She, who had understood the nuances of a Rothschild mutant cadet, was now recommending it to people who couldn't pronounce it. Her family's name Hayes had once been synonymous with integrity in the world of architectural innovation. Her father, Robert Hayes, was a genius, a man who built his company, Ethelred Designs, from a garage startup into a global powerhouse. He believed in sustainable design and ethical practices principles that had ultimately made him vulnerable. Chloe remembered a house filled with warmth blueprints spread across the dining room table and the infectious sound of her father's laughter. That world had been shattered, imploded under the weight of a hostile takeover. It was a swift, brutal corporate execution orchestrated by a man who saw companies not as legacies or collections of people, but as assets to be stripped and sold for parts. The name of that man was a curse, she whispered to herself in the dark, a name that fueled her through grueling all-night study sessions. Conrad Vance. Tonight the restaurant was particularly electric. The air crackled with the presence of power. Chloe moved through the maze of tables, her tray held high and steady. She refilled water glasses with a ghost of a touch, cleared plates with silent grace, and answered questions about the pan-seared branzino with a script she could recite in her sleep. She was a phantom, visible only when needed. It was a role she had perfected. "Excuse me, girl." A sharp voice cut through the ambient murmur. Chloe turned, her professional smile already forming. A woman with a surgically tightened face and lips plumped to a comical pout, gestured impatiently at a microscopic speck on her wineglass. "Is this how you clean your stemware?" "I expect perfection, not this filth." Chloe's smile didn't waver. "My deepest apologies, madam. I will bring you a fresh glass immediately." Inside, a familiar, weary resignation settled in. This was the nightly dance of servitude. She had to absorb the petty frustrations and casual cruelties of the ultra-rich to be a blank canvas for their projections of superiority. She fetched a new meticulously polished glass from the bar, presenting it as if it were a holy grail. The woman inspected it, holding it up to the light before giving a dismissive nod. Chloe retreated, her back straight, her dignity a fragile shield. She polished every night before her shift. Her station was near the kitchen, a chaotic inferno of clattering pans and shouted orders, a stark contrast to the serene elegance of the dining room. Her friend, another waitress named Sarah, leaned against the stainless steel counter, rubbing her tired feet. "Table 7 is a nightmare," Sarah muttered, rolling her eyes. "Mrs. Davenport is complaining that the ambient light is accentuating her wrinkles." Chloe managed a small, tired smile. "I've got the Winthrops at 12. They sent back their shadow bond because it was too symmetrically plated. They said it lacked artistic spontaneity." Sarah snorted. "You're kidding. I wish I were." They shared a look of mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the absurd reality they inhabited. They were intelligent, hard-working women navigating a world that judged them by the uniform they wore. Sarah knew fragments of Chloe's story, that she was a law student, that she came from a different background, but Chloe kept the full, painful truth locked away. It was too heavy to share a ghost that haunted only her. As she prepared to check on her tables, the restaurant's manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Dubois, scurried towards the entrance. His posture straightened his anxious expression, melting into one of obsequious reverence. This shift in demeanor always heralded the arrival of a VIP, a whale in restaurant parliament. Chloe glanced towards the grand entrance. A hush seemed to fall over the front section of the dining room. Heads turned, conversations paused mid-sentence, and then he walked in. It was him, Conrad Vance. The air in Chloe's lungs turned to ice. For a moment, the bustling restaurant faded away, the sounds of clinking glass and muted conversation dissolving into a dull roar in her ears. He looked exactly as he did in the pages of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal, yet infinitely more menacing in person. He was tall and impeccably dressed in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than her tuition for the semester. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, his face a mask of chiseled aristocratic confidence. His eyes, a pale, cold blue, swept across the room with an air of possessive ownership, as if he were surveying a kingdom he had conquered. He wasn't alone. On his arm was a young woman, impossibly beautiful and alarmingly young, draped in a silk dress that shimmered under the chandeliers. She looked more like an accessory than a companion. Chloe felt a primal urge to flee, to hide in the kitchen until he was gone. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum beat out of panic and rage. This man, this predator in a tailored suit, was the architect of her family's ruin. He was the reason her father had died of a heart attack. 6 months after the takeover, a broken man stripped of his life's work. He was the reason her mother lived in a small rented condo in Florida, a shadow of her former self. He was the reason Chloe was here, balancing plates and smiling through insults, fighting for a future that had been stolen from her. Mr. Dubois fed over him, bowing and scraping like a courtier before a king. "Mr. Vance, an honor, a true honor, to have you with us tonight. Your usual table is ready." Of course, his usual table. Chloe's stomach churned. Of course, he would dine here in this temple of excess feasting on the spoils of his conquests. The table he was being led to was in her section. Panic tightened its icy grip around her throat. She couldn't serve him. She couldn't stand before him, offer him water, and ask him about his dietary restrictions. The very thought was a violation, a sacrilege against her father's memory. She turned to Sarah, her voice a strained whisper. "Sarah, can you take table 9 for me? I feel sick." Sarah's brow furrowed with concern. She looked at Chloe, then at the approaching figure of Conrad Vance. She didn't understand the connection, but she saw the genuine terror in Chloe's eyes. "Of course, Chloe, go take a minute in the back." But it was too late. Mr. Dubois, leading Vance's party, was already gesturing in her direction. "Chloe is one of our finest servers, Mr. Vance," he announced, his voice oozing with sycophantic praise. She will ensure your evening is nothing short of perfect. Conrad Vance's cold blue eyes landed on her. For a terrifying, heart-topping second, she thought he might recognize her. She was older now, her features sharpened by stress and grief, her once long hair tied back in a severe bun. But the Hayes family resemblance was strong. His gaze passed over her, however, with a complete lack of recognition. She was just part of the scenery, a uniform, a tool for his convenience. The dismissal was more insulting than any confrontation could have been. He gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod, not at her, but in her general direction. "See that you do," he said, his voice a low baritone that oozed authority and disdain. There was no escape. Trapped by the etiquette of her profession and the crushing weight of her circumstances, Chloe Hayes took a slow, steadying breath. She picked up 2 leather-bound menus, the gold area insignia feeling like a brand against her skin. Her face became a mask of professional placidity, but beneath it a dormant volcano of rage began to simmer. She would serve the man who had destroyed her life, and as she walked toward the table, a single dangerous thought began to form in the ruins of her fear. This was not just a job anymore. This was a battlefield. Walking towards table 9 felt like walking towards her own execution. Each step was a deliberate, measured act of self-control. Her legs felt like lead, her breath caught in her chest. The polished marble floor seemed to stretch into an infinite mocking expanse. Conrad Vance had already seated himself, shrugging out of his jacket with a casual movement that exposed the perfect tailoring of his shirt. He didn't look at her as she approached, his attention already focused on the wine list, which he held with an air of expert scrutiny. The young woman beside him was busy taking a selfie, angling her phone to capture both her flawless profile and the glittering cityscape behind her. Chloe stopped at the edge of the table. The scent of Vance's cologne, something expensive with notes of cedar and arrogance, assaulted her senses, triggering a visceral memory of a press conference years ago. It was the one where he had announced the restructuring of Ethel Red Designs, a clinical euphemism for its complete evisceration. She had watched it on TV, clutching her father's hand as he stared at the screen, his face ashen. "Good evening." Chloe began, her voice miraculously steady, a testament to the ironclad control she had learned to exert over herself. "My name is Chloe, and I will be your server this evening. May I start you with some water? We have still sparkling or our artesian spring water from Norway." Vance didn't look up from the wine list. "Sparkling 2 glasses and bring me the 2005 Chateau Margaux. Don't bother asking if I want to taste it first. Just decant it and bring it." He dismissed her with a flick of his wrist, his eyes still scanning the pages. It was an order, not a request delivered with the casual assumption that the world was staffed for his convenience. The young woman, whose name he had not bothered to introduce, finally looked up from her phone. "And can I get like a vodka soda with 3 limes really squeezed in there?" she asked, her voice a vapid drawl. "Of course," Chloe replied, maintaining her mask of polite neutrality. As she turned to leave, Vance's voice stopped her. "And girl," he said the word girl, dripping with condescension. He finally lifted his eyes to look at her, but his gaze was impersonal, like one might look at a vending machine. "Make sure the wine is at the correct temperature. I sent a bottle back last week. The cellar master should have been fired. Don't make me have you fired." The threat was delivered so casually, so devoid of emotion, it was more chilling than any shouted insult. It was a simple statement of his power. He could erase her livelihood with a word, and it would mean nothing to him. Chloe's jaw tightened. "I will personally ensure it is perfect, sir." She said the word sir, tasting like ash in her mouth. She retreated to the sommelier station, her hands trembling slightly as she relayed the order. The sommelier, a kind Frenchman named Jean-Luc, gave her a sympathetic look. He knew Vance's reputation. "The dragon is in his den tonight, eh, Chloe?" he murmured carefully, retrieving the requested bottle from the temperature-controlled cellar. "Handle with care. This one he enjoys breathing fire." Chloe watched him decant the deep ruby liquid, the wine flowing like blood into the crystal vessel. Each minute she spent waiting for it to breathe felt like an hour. She was trapped in a nightmare, forced to participate in the charade of civility with the monster from her past. She could feel his eyes on her from across the room, an impatient, demanding stare that made her soon crawl. Returning to the table was even harder than the first approach. She poured the wine with a steady hand. She didn't know she possessed the rich aroma filling the air. Vance swirled the liquid in his glass, inhaled its bouquet with a theatrical flourish, and took a sip. He closed his eyes for a moment. An emperor tasting for poison. Acceptable. He finally pronounced a word that was meant as high praise. He then launched into a monologue directed at his companion, but clearly intended for anyone within earshot to appreciate his importance. He spoke of a recent acquisition in Southeast Asia, of gutting a company's board of directors, of the weakness of his competitors. He used words like cull, liquidate, and dominate. He was describing in essence the very same strategy he had used to destroy her father's company. He was bragging about it. Chloe stood a respectful distance away, waiting to take their food order, forced to listen to the gleeful narration of his rapacity. Every word was a fresh stab at a wound that had never healed. She remembered the late-night phone calls her father had made. His voice strained and desperate as he tried to secure financing to fight off the takeover. She remembered the day the locks were changed on his office building, the Ethel red design sign unceremoniously taken down. She remembered the look of utter defeat in his eyes, a light extinguished forever. "We're ready to order," Vance said, snapping his fingers in her direction without looking at her. The sound cracked through the air like a whip. Chloe stepped forward, her notepad in hand. "Certainly, sir. I'll have the Wagyu steak." "Rare, and I mean rare. If the chef even thinks about cooking it past red, send it back," he commanded. "And she'll have the—" He glanced at his companion as if she were a child whose tastes he had to guess. "The lobster risotto and a side salad. She needs to watch her figure." The young woman offered a weak, tight-lipped smile, a flicker of humiliation in her eyes before it was quickly masked. Chloe's heart, despite her own turmoil, felt a pang of pity for her. She was just another asset to him, something to be displayed and controlled. "An excellent choice, sir," Chloe said, her voice a hollow echo. As the evening wore on, the ordeal intensified. Vance was a demanding, capricious diner. He complained that his sparkling water was not bubbly enough. He sent back his soup because it was a degree too cool. He snapped at her for refilling his water glass too slowly, then chastised her for hovering too close to the table. Each interaction was a small, calculated assertion of dominance, a way to remind her and everyone around them of his status and her insignificance. Chloe performed her duties with flawless, robotic precision. She anticipated his needs. She was attentive but invisible. She endured his condescension with a placid expression that revealed nothing of the storm raging within her. She was playing a long game, though she didn't yet know what the end game was. All she knew was that she would not break. To show any weakness in front of him would be to dishonor her father's memory. Her mind raced a chaotic swirl of past and present. She saw her father at his drafting table, his face lit with passion as he sketched a new building. She saw him on the witness stand during the sham legal proceedings. Vance had initiated his integrity questioned and his reputation smeared. She saw the for sale sign being hammered into the lawn of their family home. These images flickered behind her eyes as she placed a perfectly seared Wagyu steak in front of the man responsible. The final act of the meal arrived. Dessert. Vance ordered a cheese plate and a glass of vintage port, continuing his lecture on the art of the deal. Chloe was in the process of clearing the main course plates when it happened. In reaching for the risotto plate, her sleeve, just for a fraction of a second, brushed against the side of Vance's water glass. A single tiny droplet of condensation trickled down the crystal and onto the pristine white tablecloth. It was nothing, a minuscule, insignificant event that 99% of diners would never even notice. But Conrad Vance noticed everything. His monologue stopped abruptly. His cold blue eyes, sharp as shards of glass, darted from her sleeve to the glass and then to the tiny glistening drop of water on the linen. The silence that fell over the table was sudden and absolute. What he said, his voice dangerously low. "Do you think you are doing?" Chloe froze her hand, hovering over the plate. "My apologies, sir. I was just clearing the, are you incompetent?" He cut her off, his voice rising in volume, drawing the attention of the surrounding tables. "Or just clumsy? Do you have any idea what this suit costs?" Do you know what this meal costs? This is Aria, not some greasy spoon diner. We expect a certain standard of service here, a standard you are clearly incapable of meeting." His words were like physical blows. The color drained from Chloe's face. She could feel the eyes of the other patrons on her, a mixture of pity, discomfort, and morbid curiosity. Mr. Dubois was already scurrying over his face, pale with alarm. "Is there a problem, Mr. Vance?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Vance sneered a cruel twist of his lips. "The problem, Dubois, is your staff. This girl is a disgrace. Clumsy, inattentive." He waved a dismissive hand at Chloe. "I come here for perfection, and I am met with this amateurish display." Chloe stood motionless, a statue carved from humiliation. She wanted the floor to swallow her whole, but beneath the shame, the simmering rage was beginning to boil. The droplet of water was just a pretext. This wasn't about service. This was a demonstration of power. This was who he was, a man who built himself up by tearing others down, whether it was a multi-million-dollar corporation or a waitress earning minimum wage. He had done this to her father using legal loopholes and fabricated accusations as his weapons. Now he was doing it to her using a drop of water in his booming voice. The pattern was the same. The cruelty was the same. And in that moment, something inside Chloe snapped. The years of repressed grief, the nights of silent sobbing, the burning injustice of it all coalesced into a single point of cold, hard clarity. The fear was gone, burned away by the white-hot fall of her anger. She would not be his victim. Not tonight. Conrad Vance was enjoying himself. He thrived on this kind of public display, a small drama where he was the unquestioned star director and judge. The fear in the manager's eyes, the humiliation on the waitress's face, the rapt attention of the surrounding tables. It was all a form of tribute, a confirmation of his power. He was a shark who felt most aloof when he sensed blood in the water, and the tiny droplet on the tablecloth was all the blood he needed. I am terribly sorry, Mr. Vance," Mr. Dubois stammered, wringing his hands. "Please allow us to compensate you for the entire meal. And Chloe, she will be disciplined, I assure you." Vance let out a short, humorless laugh. "Compensate me, Dubois. You don't seem to understand. I don't need your money. This isn't about the cost of the meal. It's about the principle. It's about competence. It's about the fact that I have to be surrounded by mediocrity." He gestured vaguely at Chloe as if she were a piece of faulty equipment. Chloe remained silent, her posture rigid. She didn't look at Mr. Dubois or the gawking diners. Her eyes were fixed on Conrad Vance. For the first time all evening, she wasn't seeing a terrifying corporate titan or a demanding customer. She was seeing a bully, a small, pathetic man who derived his sense of worth from the belittlement of others. She saw the man who had cornered her father not with superior business acumen, but with ruthless, underhanded tactics, bleeding his company dry with frivolous lawsuits and market manipulation until he was forced to sell for pennies on the dollar. This display of public shaming was just a microcosm of the same cruel methodology. People like her, Vance continued, his voice resonating with theatrical disdain. They don't understand excellence. They drift through life expecting handouts, doing the bare minimum. They have no ambition, no drive. They are a weight on the rest of us, the people who actually build things, who actually matter. His words meant to crush her had the opposite effect. They were a crystallization of his entire worldview, a philosophy of contempt that she had been fighting against in her law studies and in her life. He wasn't just insulting her as a waitress. He was insulting her as a person, as a member of a class of people he deemed beneath him. He was insulting her father, who had built a company on passion and innovation, not on the broken backs of others. The young woman beside him stared down at her plate, her perfect makeup unable to hide the profound discomfort on her face. She looked trapped. Another beautiful object in Vance's collection, now part of a scene she clearly wanted no part of. Vance reached into the inner pocket of his jacket. With a flourish, he pulled out a thick money clip. It was sterling silver monogrammed with a V. He slid off a thick stack of crisp new $100 bills. Chloe's breath hitched. She didn't know what he was about to do, but she knew it would be cruel. He held the stack of bills between his thumb and forefinger. He looked directly at Chloe, a smirk playing on his lips. You know what the problem is? People like you only understand one thing. And then he tossed the money. It wasn't a simple drop. It was a deliberate, contemptuous flick of the wrist. The bills, bound together by nothing but their own crispness, broke apart in midair. They fluttered downwards, a slow, silent cascade of green and white landing around Chloe's feet on the gleaming marble floor. One bill drifted onto the toe of her sensible black shoe. Another settled near the leg of a neighboring table. The act was so shocking, so brazenly degrading, that an audible gasp rippled through the dining room. Conversations didn't just pause. They died. The gentle clinking of silverware stopped. The music from the string quartet in the corner seemed to fade into nothingness. The entire bustling theater of aria froze every eye in the room. Now fixed on the tableau at table 9, the powerful billionaire leaning back in his chair with a triumphant sneer, the scattered money on the floor, and the lone waitress standing in the center of it all. Mr. Dubois looked like he was about to have an aneurysm. His face was a ghastly shade of white, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This was beyond a customer complaint. This was a spectacle of unparalleled humiliation. There, Vance said into the suffocating silence, his voice booming with satisfaction. A tip for your services. Maybe you can use it to buy a lesson in competence. Or perhaps just a new uniform one without your clumsiness all over it. He expected tears. He expected her to run away in shame. Or perhaps he hoped she would stoop down in a greedy, undignified scramble to pick up the cash, confirming his belief in her lowly nature. Any of these reactions would have solidified his victory. He had reduced her to her base function, a poor girl who could be bought, placated, or dismissed with money. But Chloe did none of those things. She stood perfectly still for a long moment, the money lying at her feet like an offering to a scorned god. The seconds stretched into an eternity. The silence in the room grew heavier, more profound. It was no longer just a pause in the ambient noise. It was an entity in itself, a vacuum filled with anticipation and disbelief. Chloe's gaze, which had been locked on Vance, slowly dropped to the floor. She looked at the scattered bills. She saw Benjamin Franklin's face staring up at her from the polished marble. It was the currency of her country, the symbol of its ambitions and its corruptions. It was the tool Vance used to build his empire and to destroy her family. It was just paper, but it was also everything. She took a slow, deep breath, pulling the frigid air into her lungs. The initial shock, the hot sting of humiliation began to recede. In its place, something cold and hard settled in her chest. It was the clarity she had felt moments before, now sharpened to a razor's edge. The game was over. The charade was done. He had escalated this from a simple power play to a declaration of war on her dignity, and he had no idea who he was fighting. With a grace that seemed utterly out of place in the charged atmosphere, Chloe lowered herself. She bent her knees not in a frantic scramble, but in a slow, deliberate genuflection. The entire room watched me as she knelt on the cold marble floor. Her movements were fluid and controlled, like a dancer beginning a complex and sorrowful performance. The humiliation he had intended to inflict upon her was being transformed moment by moment into something else entirely. Something powerful, something dangerous. She was not groveling. She was preparing. As Chloe knelt, the silence in Arya became absolute. It was a living, breathing thing, a shared exhalation of 100 people who knew they were witnessing a moment that would be recounted for years to come. Every diner, every waiter, every busboy was frozen, their attention utterly captivated. Conrad Vance watched her, his smirk unwavering, convinced he was about to witness her final pathetic submission. He saw a waitress on her knees, and in his mind the transaction was complete. He had paid for her humiliation, and now she would collect her fee. Chloe's fingers, long and nimble, from years of both piano lessons in her youth and carrying heavy trays in her present, touched the first $100 bill. The paper was crisp, almost sharp. She did not snatch it up. She picked it up delicately, as if it were a fragile artifact. Then she moved to the next one, and the next. Her process was methodical, painstaking. She gathered each bill with a quiet reverence that was deeply unsettling. She wasn't a desperate woman scrambling for cash. She was a meticulous archivist cataloging an injustice. With each bill she collected, she folded it neatly in half, the crease sharp and precise. She placed the folded bills one on top of the other, forming a neat, compact stack in the palm of her left hand. The room watched her every move. They saw the straightness of her back, the focused intensity in her eyes. There was no shame in her posture, only a profound, almost terrifying sense of purpose. The act of collecting the money which Vance had intended as the final note in her degradation was being transformed into a ritual of defiance. Vance's smirk began to falter. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. The sniveling, tearful retreat or the greedy scrabbling had not materialized. Instead, there was this cold, quiet ceremony that he could not comprehend. A flicker of unease and unfamiliar sensation for him began to stir in his gut. Chloe gathered the last bill. She now held the small, neat stack of folded money in her palm. Slowly, with the same deliberate grace, she rose to her feet. She did not look flustered or defeated. She looked composed, regal, even in her simple black uniform. She held the stack of bills not like a tip, but like evidence. She took 2 steps forward, closing the distance between herself and the table, until she was standing directly before Conrad Vance. She held his gaze. Her eyes, which had been downcast or professionally neutral all evening, were now blazing with an intensity that made him physically recoil. It was a look of pure, unadulterated loathing, refined into the point of a spear. She extended her hand, the one holding the neatly stacked bills. "You dropped this," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the silence of the vast dining room with the clarity of a ringing bell. It was not the voice of a timid waitress. It was the voice of an equal. Vance stared at her momentarily, speechless. He was baffled. "I didn't drop it." He finally managed a sneer returning to his lips. "It's a tip for you. Take it." Chloe's expression did not change. Her gaze did not waver. "No," she said, the single word hanging in the air, sharp and final. "I don't think it is." She placed the stack of bills on the table beside his plate of half-eaten steak. She pushed it forward an inch with the tip of her finger, a gesture of undeniable finality. "We have a policy against accepting charity," she continued, her voice still quiet. Yet every person in the room heard every single word. "And besides, I think you're going to need this more than I will." A confused murmur rippled through the room. Vance's face, which had been a mask of arrogant amusement, was now clouding over with genuine anger and confusion. Who was this girl? Who was this insignificant waitress to defy him to speak to him with such insolence? "What the hell is that supposed to mean?" He snarled, his voice a low growl. Chloe straightened to her full height. The moment had come. The culmination of years of pain, of study, of silent, burning rage. She let the mask of the waitress fall away completely, and for the first time she let him see the woman beneath. She let him see the ghost he had created. "My name," she said, her voice ringing with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Is Chloe Hayes?" She paused, letting the name settle in the air. She watched his face for a flicker of recognition, but there was none. To him, the name meant nothing. He had destroyed so many lives, so many companies, that the names of his victims were a meaningless blur. So she gave him another. "My father was Robert Hayes." This time she saw it. A subtle, almost imperceptible shift in his cold blue eyes, a tightening around his mouth. The name registered a distant echo from a past conquest. Robert Hayes. Ethel Red Designs. An easy victory from years ago. The silence in the room was now so complete it felt like a physical pressure. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Who was Robert Hayes? What was happening? Chloe's next words were delivered with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Each one aimed to inflict maximum damage. "You might remember him. He was the founder and CEO of Ethel Red Designs, an architectural firm you acquired and dismantled about 5 years ago." Vance's face went rigid. The color began to drain from it. The confident, sneering billionaire was gone, replaced by a man suddenly on the defensive. A man caught in a spotlight he did not control. He was no longer the director of this drama. He was its unwilling subject. Chloe gestured with her chin toward the small stack of $100 bills she had placed on the table. "You threw $900 at my feet, Mr. Vance," she said, her voice dropping to an almost conversational yet chilling tone. "Let's call it a down payment." She paused again, her timing perfect, ensuring the entire room was hanging on her next sentence. "It feels a little light," she said, her voice laced with ice compared to the $300 million you stole from him. "From my family." The bomb had been dropped. The silence that followed was not empty. It was explosive. It was filled with the shock of 100 minds processing the revelation. The waitress, the girl he had humiliated, was the daughter of a man he had ruined. The petty drama over a spilled drop of water had just become a story of epic corporate malfeasance and personal revenge. Every person in that room, the bankers, the lawyers, the socialites, understood the magnitude of what had just happened. Conrad Vance hadn't just insulted a waitress. He had been publicly confronted by his past. His face was a mask of disbelief, then fury, then something else, a flicker of genuine fear. He had been exposed, his carefully curated image as a powerful, untouchable titan, shattered in the most public of settings. He looked at Chloe, truly looked at her for the first time, and he finally saw her. He saw the ghost of Robert Hayes in her determined jaw and her intelligent, unforgiving eyes. The whole room had gone silent. And in that silence, Conrad Vance realized his performance was over and Chloe Hayes had just begun. The silence that Chloe's revelation had created did not break. It shattered. It was replaced by a cacophony of hushed, frantic whispers. Phones previously used for taking pictures of aesthetically pleasing food were now being discreetly raised to their cameras aimed at Table 9. The story was too sensational, too perfectly dramatic to not be captured. A billionaire publicly shamed by the ghost of a past victim. It was the kind of story that would ignite social media and be dissected on news blogs for days. Conrad Vance, for the first time in his adult life, was utterly flummoxed. His face cycled through a series of emotions: shock, rage, denial, and finally a desperate attempt to regain control. He pushed his chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the marble floor. "This is absurd." He blustered, his voice a little too loud, a little too strained. "This is a pathetic shakedown. She's clearly unstable. Security Dubois, get this liar out of here." But his words lacked their usual venomous authority. The spell was broken. He was no longer a king in his court. He was just an angry, cornered man. Mr. Dubois, who had been frozen in horror, finally snapped into action. But he didn't move towards Chloe. He seemed uncertain, caught between his fear of Vance and the undeniable power of the moment Chloe had created. Chloe did not flinch at his outburst. She simply stood her ground, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to his sputtering rage. "A liar?" she asked, her voice still measured and clear. "I have the court documents, mister. Advance the ones from the preliminary injunctions you filed to bleed my father's company of its legal funds. I have the depositions from the employees you forced out with non-disclosure agreements. I spent the last 2 years of my life studying them. I'm a third-year law student at Columbia specializing in corporate litigation. You didn't just ruin a man. You created your own worst enemy." Every word was a nail hammered into his public coffin. She wasn't just an emotional victim seeking revenge. She was an intelligent, informed adversary who knew his playbook. Vance's companion, the young model, looked horrified. She slowly slid her chair away from him, a physical act of disassociation. This was not the glamorous evening she had signed up for. Before security could arrive, or Mr. Dubois could decide on a course of action, a new player entered the scene. An elderly man who had been dining alone at a nearby table rose slowly to his feet. He was impeccably dressed in a classic tweed jacket with a kind, weathered face and sharp, intelligent eyes behind a pair of gold-rimmed spectacles. He had watched the entire exchange with a keen, analytical interest. He walked over to the table, his presence commanding a quiet authority that Vance's blustering no longer could. He placed a gentle hand on Chloe's arm. "Miss Hayes," he asked, his voice a warm, cultured baritone. "Forgive the intrusion. My name is Arthur Abernathy." Chloe looked at him confused. The name sounded vaguely familiar. "I was your father's first legal counsel." Anathy continued, a sad smile touching his lips. A long time ago, before he made it big. I knew Robert well. He was a good man, an honorable man. He then turned his sharp gaze upon Conrad Vance. The warmth in his eyes vanished, replaced by a glacial disapproval. Vance, I'm familiar with your work as well. Conrad Vance's face went pale. He knew exactly who Arthur Abernathy was. Abernathy wasn't just any lawyer. He was a legend in New York. Legal circles, a lion of the old guard, known for his fierce ethical standards and his brilliant strategic mind. He was semi-retired, but still held immense influence. To be in Abernathy's crosshairs was a death sentence for one's reputation. Abernathy Vance grunted, the name a concession of defeat. This is none of your concern. A young woman of this caliber, the daughter of my late friend, being publicly humiliated by a corporate buccaneer like you. Abernathy's voice was soft, but it carried the weight of moral condemnation. I believe that makes it very much my concern. He turned back to Chloe, his expression softening. What you did here tonight, young lady, took more courage than I've seen in a courtroom in 20 years. Your father would have been immensely proud. Tears which she had held back through all the humiliation and anger pricked at the back of Chloe's eyes at the mention of her father's pride. She blinked them away fiercely. Now was not the time for tears. Abernathy gave her arm a reassuring squeeze. Come, let you and I have a chat. I believe my dinner is finished, and frankly, the atmosphere in here has been rather spoiled. He gave one last withering look to Vance. You will be hearing from me, Vance. I suggest you retain counsel. Good counsel, you're going to need it. With that, he gently guided a stunned Chloe away from the table. As they walked through the silent, watching restaurant, it felt like the entire world had shifted on its axis. She was no longer Chloe the waitress. She was Chloe Hayes, Robert Hayes' daughter, and she had an ally. Mr. Dubois intercepted them near the exit, his face a mess of conflicting emotions. Miss Hayes, Chloe, you don't have to worry about your job. Chloe looked at him, and for the first time that night, she offered a small, genuine smile. Thank you, Mr. Dubois, but I quit. Stepping out of the oppressive, overheated atmosphere of Aria and into the cool night air of Manhattan was like emerging from a deep sea dive. Chloe took a deep breath, the city lights blurring in her vision. The adrenaline that had sustained her began to fade, leaving a profound, trembling exhaustion in its wake. Are you all right, my dear Abernathy? Asked his voice, laced with grandfatherly concern. I think so, she breathed. I'm not sure what just happened. What just happened? Abernathy said, a grim satisfaction in his tone, is that you finally gave the devil his due publicly. Conrad Vance values his public image above all else. He cultivates a persona as a ruthless but brilliant visionary. You just showed a room full of New York's most influential people that he is nothing more than a common bully and a thief. He held a taxi, holding the door for her. My office, we have much to discuss. Inside the cab, as the city lights' straight actions began to sink in, she had confronted the monster. She had spoken her truth. But what now? He'll come after me, she said, the thought a sudden chill. His lawyers, his PR firms, they'll try to destroy me. They'll paint me as an extortionist, a gold digger. Let them try, Abernathy said, his eyes glinting. I've grown bored in my retirement. I could use a good fight. And we have something his army of soulless corporate lawyers doesn't have: the truth. He looked at her, his expression serious. Tell me everything, Chloe. Everything you remember about the takeover. Every document you've studied. Your father was a meticulous man. I know he kept records. Vance won by using 1,000 small cuts. Legal but unethical maneuvers designed to create a death by 1,000 paper cuts. But men like Vance always get sloppy. They get arrogant. Somewhere in that mountain of paperwork, there is a mistake, a lie, an illegal act. Our job is to find it. As the taxi sped through the night, carrying her away from her old life and towards an uncertain new one, Chloe Hayes began to talk. She told him about the shell corporations, the proxy battles, the sudden, inexplicable dips in stock value, the rumors spread to spook investors. She poured out the details she had spent years memorizing, the intricate corporate machinery Vance had used to crush her family. And as she spoke, the exhaustion was replaced by a familiar, powerful feeling. The burning determination that had gotten her through law school, that had fueled her on the darkest nights. She had thrown the first stone. Now, with Arthur Abernathy by her side, she was ready to start an avalanche. The fight was far from over. It had just begun. The video of the Arya incident exploded online. Chloe was instantly hailed as a folk hero, but Conrad Vance's PR machine retaliated with a brutal smear campaign, painting her as an unstable extortionist. Ignoring the public noise, Chloe and Arthur Abernathy focused on the law. They assembled a team of forensic accountants and investigators, turning Anathy's office into a war room dedicated to finding a crack in Vance's corporate armor. Their breakthrough came in the form of Frank Coleman, her father's former CFO, who had been forced into silence with a draconian NOA. Initially terrified, Frank was moved by Chloe's appeal to his memory of her father and finally revealed the truth. Vance's takeover wasn't just ruthless, it was criminal. He had used a complex offshore scheme, a ghost trade, to orchestrate a massive short-selling attack, illegally manipulating the stock price downwards just before his acquisition. It was undeniable securities fraud. This testimony was the smoking gun. Armed with irrefutable evidence, Abernathy filed a massive civil suit and a formal complaint with the SEC. The narrative immediately shifted from a media spat to a serious legal threat. The attacks on Chloe ceased, and the stock of Vance Industries wavered. Soon the call came from Vance's lawyers. They wanted a meeting to discuss a settlement. Chloe agreed to attend, but not to negotiate a price. She was going to demand justice, not a payout. The reckoning took place in a sterile top-floor conference room overlooking the city. Conrad Vance, flanked by his lawyers, made the opening move he always did. He offered money. A staggering $50 million was placed on the table in exchange for Chloe's signature on a permanent non-disclosure agreement. It was a sum meant to silence, to erase the past. Chloe didn't even look at the offer. Instead, she pushed a single sheet of paper across the mahogany table. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a list of terms for his surrender. It demanded a full public apology printed in national newspapers, admitting to his illegal tactics, the establishment of a $300 million foundation in her father's name to aid victims of corporate fraud, and his immediate and permanent resignation from the company he had built. Vance's lawyers erupted, threatening decades of litigation, but Arthur Abernathy silenced them calmly, revealing their trump card, a briefcase containing a sworn affidavit and irrefutable forensic proof of securities fraud. He presented Vance with a choice: accept Chloe's terms for his public disgrace, or face the SEC and a likely prison sentence for racketeering. The fight drained from Vance's face, leaving only a hollowed-out shell. He was checkmated. He accepted every term. Chloe Hayes finished law school and joined the newly renamed firm of Anathy and Hayes. She had not sought riches, but justice. In restoring her father's legacy, she had forged her own. What you just heard isn't just a story of revenge. It's a testament to the indomitable power of dignity and the quiet strength of those who are underestimated. Chloe Hayes started her night as a waitress, invisible to the world of power and privilege she served. She ended it as the architect of a titan's downfall. Her story is a powerful reminder that wealth can buy luxury, but it cannot buy immunity from consequence. It shows us that the most profound victories aren't won with fists or fortunes, but with courage, intelligence, and an unwavering belief in the truth. The world is full of bullies like Conrad Vance, but it is also full of heroes like Chloe, hiding in plain sight, waiting for their moment. If her incredible journey from humiliation to vindication moved you, please give this video a thumbs up to show your support. Don't forget to share this story with someone who needs a reminder that the little guy can win. And for more true life stories that inspire and empower, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell. Thank you for listening.